Yes.
Was there any repercussions from your to your parents when they sent you to that private school?
No, but my parents were watched very. Oh, were my any repercussion on my parents? Well, not really. They were watched, and of course later, my brother was being drafted, and never heard of him again. Any other question? Yes.
Yeah. If you had it to do over again, what would you practically do to try to get ready?
If I would have to do it over again, I would, of course, have an underground movement, probably risking my life to inform the people what they had to do, because you are literally sitting ducks if you don't know anything. That is why it is so important that people are being informed on socialism and Marxism, which is creeping up here very fast, a lot faster than I ever envisioned. You know, in my wildest dreams, I could never imagine when I came to this country that I would have to fight the same thing over again, what I left behind. Yes?
Well, thank you very much for the story, because for many people, a lot of people, it's probably first time heard. It very much reminds the story of Soviet Union in 30s. And we all know what Soviet Union ended up with. So my question is, when did you come to this country? How did you actually decide to leave your homeland?
I came to this great country in 1950, and later I became a naturalized but grateful American citizen. And then, of course, in the early 70s, when abortion became Roe v. Wade was legalized, that's when I stepped in and informed other people what can happen. And then especially when they passed in my state the Equal Rights Amendment, because I knew that if 38 states would ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, which is actually the tool to equalize the country's wealth, and I fought the Equal Rights Amendment. We rescinded it in South Dakota, and it took me 6 years to do it. And ever since, I am out informing people what socialism and communism is, informing the people, because how could you know? You never lived it, but I've lived it, I've seen it, I was there, and nobody can challenge me. And like I said, this is the Berlin Diary. It's written by William Shirer, who was the American correspondent there in the 1930s and 40s. And everything what I told you is in this book. So nobody can challenge me. It's fact, what I'm telling you. Anybody else? Which one? Yes.
I have two questions. Number one, were your Bibles or religious documentations confiscated?
They were not confiscated, but you see, under socialism, you don't need religion. They don't, I mean, they wiped that out, because that, especially under young children.
They bred it out of.
Exactly. I mean, they cannot transform the older generation, but the young generation is being indoctrinated that there is no God, there is no Bible, nothing, because that's all like opium. You don't need it.
And my second question is, I'm sure that many of us would like for other people that we know to have the experience that we've been honored with today. Is there going to be a DVD
Yes.
for us?
This is the reason I have DVDs and CDs out there. I urge everybody to have a house party and play my DVD or CD, invite a few people over on Sunday afternoon and educate them. And that's very, very important, because that is the way you learn what socialism is all about. And it'll spread very, very fast. And of course, I travel throughout the United States, everywhere. Next week I'm going to Nashville, and I'm going to speak at the University of Alabama. Then I go to California. I speak at the University of Sacramento. I want to hit the young people. They need to understand. Thank you. Yes.
In connection with speaking to the young people, how do we educate our children? Those of us who have small children and we're putting them through school, what do you recommend we do to educate our children?
Well, you tell your children the truth. You tell your children the absolute truth. Don't believe what President Obama says, or what some of the politicians are saying, or even what some of the teachers are saying. That is why a lot of families homeschool their children, because of course everybody cannot do that, you know, so you have to be the parents to tell your children the truth, you know, like I did with my children when they grew up, you know. We told every night at the dinner table, we discussed what happened in the schools, what is right and what is wrong. And all my children are very conservative, and so are my 8 grandchildren. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
How do you feel about the immigration issues that our country is faced with today?
Well, the immigration issue is, I give you just a little story. In 1985, I had the pleasure to go to Geneva, Switzerland, to attend the summit conference between President Reagan and Premier Gorbachev. I had 2 functions. The American women were flying over there to support President Reagan. My function was to get accommodation, hotel accommodation for the American women, transportation, and translating press releases. My other function was to infiltrate the Communist Peace March, which was organized by Hollywood. By Hollywood, yes. And I was disguised as a hippie. I looked horrible, just horrible. But I found out that the Peace March would start at the English Garden in Geneva, and I went there. So I blended in very nice with the Hollywood people. I marched with Barbara Boxer, who was also a hippie at that time. Today she's a senator. And I marched with Jesse Jackson and the late Congresswoman Bella Abzug. So as we went with the Peace March, there were about maybe 500 of us, to the Hotel Hilton, where we had the press conference. And as we arrived there, Bella Abzug met a German woman who had a seat in the German parliament with the Green Party. Today it's the new red. Green is the new red. And Bella spoke to her in fluent German, that they had a big surprise that they would have a private meeting with Premier Gorbachev. Well, of course, I understood the language. I thought, how can those two women meet with a head of state privately? There's something going on. I also noticed that there were 8 or 10 people who were not at the Peace March, and they looked very disheveled, muddy boots and torn jackets. So I walked up to a woman, and of course I had all the peace buttons on me and feminist buttons, you know. So she looked at all my buttons and she said, "Oh, you are one of us." And I just smiled at her. And so I said, "How come you were not at the Peace March?" Well, she said, "You know, Switzerland wouldn't let us in legally, so we went over the borders. And so that's why they had muddy boots and whatever." And I said, "Well, why?" Well, she said, "We are all members of the German Communist Party, and we are here to support Gorbachev." "Oh," I said, "that's so interesting. Tell me more about your goals." So she started telling me that right now they would take Nicaragua. The war was going on. Then they would go into Honduras. Then Mexico. And I said, "Oh, Mexico, that's such a corrupt, poor country. Why would you vote in Mexico?" Well, you know, what they want to do is spread their communist philosophy. But she said, Mexico is one of our most important base. I said, "For what?" She said, "We will call back the territory what America stole from us." And then she rattled off California, Texas, and Arizona. And I said, "Well, wait a minute. You cannot just do that, you know. Sounds to me like a little revolution." She laughed out loud and she said, "You Americans, you are so naive. Your churches are doing the work for us." I said, "Our churches?" You know, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I read in the church publication, the sanctuary movement. Our churches brought in the illegals, and they would feed them and then house them and then spread them around wherever they are. So I said, "Oh, so when is this event supposed to happen?" Now this was 1985. She said, "Oh, we are very patient. We have a lot of time for the right moment." And I said, "For the right moment?" Well, she said, "It all depends who your president will be." And I said, "Well, give me a little ballpark figure. What year?" She said, "Well, 2004, but most likely 2008. Who is our president? And why aren't the borders closed?" Yes, they're not all here for jobs. They're not all here looking for jobs. They have other things on their mind. Be very careful. Be very careful in your legislature, because it can happen. Thank you very much.